The following is a sermon from Grace City Church in Denver, Colorado. Grace City exists to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ. For more info, visit gracecitydenver.com.
A reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his individual family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin; Dan and Naphtali; Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all the generations died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if a war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." This is the word of the Lord.
There is an unspoken bargain at the heart of a lot of American Christianity that goes something like this: I'll give God what he wants, and then he'll give me what I want. The underlying narrative is basically, if you're really serious about your faith, if you read your Bible and pray every day, if you're generally a good and decent person, then life will be what? It'll be easy, it'll be blessed, it'll be basically awesome. That's the bargain we make with God. I mean, who's writing a New York Times bestseller that says the opposite of that? And they say, you've read the rags to riches story. Let me tell you my riches to rags story. I followed Jesus and everything fell apart. Like, no one is packing out arenas with this story that you should follow Jesus of Nazareth and it may cost you everything. What churches right now are just bursting at the seams because they faithfully preach, you might do exactly what God calls you to do and it not go very well for you. Because we're constantly evaluating things. Things didn't go well for me. I must have messed up. There's pain, there's brokenness in my life. I must have missed some fork in the road where God said, go here, and I did the opposite, and therefore this is God's punishment in my life. If I get back on track, maybe I can get it to go away. And I want to begin this morning by just saying, I understand, most of your stories, chunks of your stories. I know many of you experience the very real pain of, you could say, I'm doing the best I can to trust and obey the Lord, yet I'm still struggling with my finances, with my physical health, with my mental health, with joblessness or underemployment. I'm struggling maybe in my marriage or a relationship with my kids or a close friend that I'm estranged from. And you would say, I've sought to honor the Lord, but parts of my life feel enslaved or dying or dead. And it doesn't seem like it should be this way because that's not the message, unfortunately, that much of American Christianity preaches. And I want to ask this morning, what does the Bible say to someone like you if you're saying, I'm not perfect, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm really trying to honor God, and life stinks right now. It doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem good. What does the Bible say to you? What does the Bible say to me? Because there are areas of my life where I could very much empathize with that general feeling. Well, we begin a new series this morning. It's a quick sprint through the book of Exodus. So those who know us, and we can take 70 sermons to go through John. We're only going to take 18 messages to go through 40 chapters of Exodus, because what I want to do is I want to keep the narrative flow just going. It's a story. It's not like deep, heavy theology that's just couched in principles, and we got to tease out, like, what is this text saying? It's so hard. It's a story. And many of you from your earliest years in Sunday school, you know the basic story of the Exodus. And we want to keep that kind of going as a story that's connected and just capture the major theological themes of this book of Exodus. So let me start this way. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word or you think of the book of Exodus? First of all, Exodus is a story about a journey. So the word Exodus, if you don't know, is a synonym for exit or departure. And what we're going to see in this journey is that the people of Israel, the Hebrews, are literally fleeing from slavery to freedom. And you'll see that little tagline on some of our kind of sermon graphics. It's a journey to freedom. And God, through the story of Exodus, is inviting each of you in your own way into this journey of freedom that God is working for his covenant people. So it's a story about a journey. Second of all, Exodus is a story of adventure. I came across these words by Philip Graham Ryken. Let me just read this, and I'll encourage you, if you're like, man, the Bible's boring, because after Exodus is Leviticus, which is like the law, and some of you slow down in the law, or you skip over to the law, and you're like, where does the next story? Exodus is not like that, okay? If you've got a friend that's like, I just think the Bible's boring, I think Christianity's boring, okay, invite them for the next couple months, because this is an adventure. Ryken says this: Exodus is an epic tale of fire, sand, wind, and water. The adventure takes place under the hot desert sun just beyond the shadow of the great pyramids. There are two mighty nations, Israel and Egypt, led by two great men, Moses, the liberating hero, and Pharaoh, the enslaving villain. Almost every scene is a masterpiece. The baby in the basket, the burning bush, the river of blood and the other plagues, the angel of death, the crossing of the Red Sea, the manna in the wilderness, the water from a rock, the thunder and lightning on the mountain, the 10 Commandments, the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, the golden calf, and the glory in the tabernacle. Okay, so it's an adventure. Invite your friends and be like, Christianity is not boring. It's really awesome. We're going on this adventure together. We're going on this journey together. Thirdly, Exodus is a story about God. And don't miss that, because Moses, from a human standpoint, will feel like in very short order, like, man, that guy is kind of the hero of the story, right? Wrong. I mean, he is called humble in Scripture, and in many ways a great leader, but it's not ultimately a story about Moses, it's a story about God. So Ryken continues, God is the one who reveals himself to Moses as the great I am. God is the one who hears the cries of his people in bondage and takes pity on their suffering, raising up a deliverer to save them. God is the one who visits the plagues on Egypt, who divides the sea and drowns Pharaoh's army. God is the one who provides bread from heaven and water from the rock. God is the one who gives the law covenant on the mountain and fills the tabernacle with his glory. From beginning to end, Exodus is a God-centered book, a theological history. And so throughout, we're going to be saying, what does this text, what is this story teaching me about the timeless, the eternal, the unchangeable nature of God? And how does he want to work in our world and our circumstances in ways that are similar to what we're reading, so we know how to pray and ask God to work? So let's start at the very beginning. 1 through 7, let's look at this again. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now, I want to pause there and just point out the first 7 verses of Exodus are basically accomplishing 2 important things. Number 1, the author is deliberately connecting the story that follows with the story that preceded it. Okay, so the only book of the Bible before this is Genesis, and what he's showing you is this is a continuation of the Genesis story. How is he doing that? Well, he's picking up right where Genesis left off. You got Jacob and the 12 sons of Jacob at the end of Genesis, and they're being blessed in different ways. Then he starts over, and actually in Hebrew, the first word of the book of Exodus is the word and. It's just a continuation of the story. And now this happened to the same family. And this is important because sequel fans in here, and I don't know if you're like Godfather people or like the Avengers people, Star Wars people, you've got Mission Impossible, you've got the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But if you were to pick up any of those series of books, which became a series of movies, and you're in part 3 and you didn't realize there's a part 1 and 2, you would be missing very important context of, I didn't know there was a backstory that led to this point. I just knew that suddenly I turned on my first Avengers movie ever, and it seemed like a bunch of really important superheroes died. That's weird. Is there no other story? Well, there's another story. So part of what we're doing here is realizing this is a sequel. It's a part 2 in a series of stories. So in Genesis, God began to form a covenant people with a family, one family. And you read about the patriarchs like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but it's this family and it's this clan, and it's always relatively small. But as we come to the end of Genesis and now the beginning of Exodus, notice there's 70 of them now, and that's a reference to the men who would be numbered among those who had an inheritance. So there may be a few hundred if they're married and have children, which ostensibly they were. So what we're going to see in Exodus is the focus is going to shift from a couple key individuals that are God's covenant people, and it's going to shift to the nation or the kingdom or the people of Israel, a much larger group. And what we're meant to see is the continuity between the promises of God in Genesis and what God accomplishes in Exodus. So you see a lot of promise fulfillment. I said this to your fathers, and the people are going to be like, we don't see it, God. And he's like, well, I see it, and I know what I told Abraham, and I know what I told Isaac, and I know what I told Jacob, and now we're going to start to see some fulfillment of what is God doing in this story. So remember to keep this together. If it helps you to go back and read some of the end chapters of Genesis, particularly the Joseph story, you'll kind of know where we're picking up. So the first thing that the author is accomplishing in verses 1 through 7 with these names, these 70 people, is like, okay, look, part 2 of Genesis is now Exodus. Now, the second major thing that the author is accomplishing in these first few verses is he's showing us the people of Israel are fulfilling the cultural mandate. What do I mean? If you're not familiar with that term, way back at the beginning of the Bible, when we're told the creation story, and it's put in this framework of 6 days of creation, on the 7th day, God's going to rest. But after God makes the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, he gives them this mandate. He gives them a call or a command, you could think of it as. And here it is. Let's put it up on the screen. So in Genesis 1:28, we read, and God blessed them, and God said to them, that's Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and have dominion over it or in it. And the idea is you're not supposed to just stay in this little tiny garden and be like, let's not multiply, let's just let God do his thing. He's like, no, you're my vice regents on earth, and I'm giving you this authority to steward the world and to multiply and to fill it and to go out and to harness things in the right way. Don't exploit the earth, but do use it in ways that steward the resources that God has blessed you to steward. By the way, after the worldwide flood, so in Genesis 8, you're reading about the flood in Noah's day. And basically, the sin had gotten so bad, God's like, okay, I'm starting over. Again, covenant family. Okay, Noah, I just choose you, and I'm going to start over. So there's this flood, and it wipes out everything, and they come off the ark with the animals. And in Genesis 9, we read this, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. And what are you seeing there? You're seeing almost an establishment of a new creation. God basically saying, okay, I started with Adam. They sinned in the garden. They did not fulfill the mandate to steward culture. So I'm starting over with Noah, and I'm giving him this same command. Now, look at verse 7 of our text. And we see that the generation of Joseph and his brothers have all died off, but what? Verse 7, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. And what I want you to see in this is the author isn't just stating like a numerical fact, ooh, the people of Israel are growing. He's making a theological statement. In this parallel, and I underline key words, and the same Hebrew words, he's basically saying, I'm starting the Exodus story, and what I want you to not miss is that the people of Israel at the beginning of the book of Exodus are doing what God called Adam and Eve and Noah and his family to do that they didn't do. So this is a theological statement where Moses is typically taken as the writer of most of this book. He's saying they're doing what God called them to do, and they are experiencing God's blessing. This multiplication in a foreign land is not just something that happens to be happening. By the way, there are 7 words that describe the flourishing of the people of Israel. 7 Hebrew words. It's different in every English translation. But the word fruitful, increased, multiplied, grew strong, exceedingly, filled, and spread abroad. There are 7 Hebrew words that the author uses to describe the fruitfulness. And something that may not be obvious to you is that number 7 throughout Scripture is a sign that something is complete or it's being perfected. And again, this is a theological statement that the author is saying the population explosion that we're seeing in the Israelite people at the beginning of the book of Exodus, this is the fulfillment of God's plan. It's the completion, it's the perfection and the working out of God's plan. And now we're meant to look at the Israelites as like, this is a paradigm of a people that are collectively fulfilling the cultural mandate and experiencing God's blessing as they submit their lives to his rule and authority. As you'll see soon enough, the people of Israel are the paradigm of goodness standing up against evil. So what we're meant to see is this isn't just a story about them. They're being held up as an example. Do as they did. Trust as they trusted. Because God is flourishing them. So here's the first key word of 4 this morning. My key word for verses 1 through 7 is just the word strength. A lot of these words are not just talking about a numerical spreading abroad. It is God is making them more numerous, but he's also making them stronger. And this is what Pharaoh is beginning to look and see, like, ooh, they're getting power. They become more threatening as they become more people. Now, if you didn't know this story yet, you'd probably be looking at verses 1 through 7. You'd be thinking, man, this is kind of awesome. Because Joseph's brothers, sure, they sold him into slavery in Egypt. That's like, before you can come out of Egypt in Exodus, you got to get to Egypt in the first place. And if you're like, why did they get to Egypt? Well, go back and read the last few chapters of Genesis. Because his brothers betrayed him. Joseph gets sold into slavery. He's living in prison because he told the truth. But then God blesses him. And you're like, this is great. I mean, I see God taking something really terrible and bringing something really beautiful out of that. And now things are back on track for God's people. And they're fulfilling the cultural mandate. And they're multiplying and they're spreading abroad. And this is totally awesome. Because if you're obeying God, this is obviously what happens, right? Everything gets awesome. Okay, verse 8. There arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. I'm like, well, this is ominous. See, Joseph was an Israelite. He goes down to Egypt. An unnamed Pharaoh in the book of Genesis recognizes in Joseph, this is a man who actually talks to God, has a relationship with God. So when I have dreams, and this guy doesn't even know what my dream was, he can tell you the dream and the interpretation of the dream. So the Pharaoh in Joseph's day is like, I recognize this is a man who has the Spirit of God, who listens to the voice of God and understands really profound things. He's the man who has the wisdom and the foresight to prepare basically the entire known world at the time for a multi-year famine. So kudos to him. And as long as that Pharaoh is alive, they basically say, look, we are indebted to you and to your family. They can all come here and we will take care of them at our expense. And you want to live in the Nile River Delta up there and just kind of multiply and expand and do your thing. We're good with that because we're grateful you saved the world. Verse 8 signals a shift because there's a new sheriff in town and he doesn't know about Joseph and he couldn't care less. He doesn't know the backstory is the idea. So verses 9 and 10 go on, and he, that is the Pharaoh, said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So this new Pharaoh does not care about the past contributions of Israel. He just sees them as a current problem, right? So he's walking in. We have a big problem. There's way too many of them. If there's some kind of revolt, if they decide to riot, we're cooked because there's more of them than there are of us. So we've got to make a preemptive strike. And what's his preemptive strike? Verse 11, therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh the store cities of Pithom and Ramses. So the second key word of this section, verses 8 through 14, we're going from strength to slavery. Slavery. And again, without the backstory of verses 1 through 7, you'd be like, well, they must have done something wrong. Because you don't just get in slavery if you're obeying God. And the author is going to be like, no, I took great pains in the first 7 verses to show you they were trusting God. They were obeying God. They were experiencing his blessing. And boom, slavery happened anyway. Because Pharaoh's solution to the size and to the strength of the people of Israel was, let's enslave them. Let's harness their labor to make ourselves stronger and more prosperous at their expense. And by the way, the text here says the Egyptians on the whole were taught to loathe and detest and fear the Israelites. So now we're going on verses 13 and 14. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. And again, this wouldn't be obvious to you, but in contrast to the 7 words describing the flourishing and the fruitfulness of Israel, now there are 8 Hebrew words to describe the oppression of the Egyptians over the Israelite people. Taskmasters, afflict, heavy burdens, ruthlessly, work as slaves, bitter, hard service. And the idea is, just as the Israelites were the paradigm of trust and obedience to God, now the Egyptians who are oppressing are going to be the paradigm of rebellion against God. They're going to go above and beyond God's blessing on the people to say, well, we curse them. We despise them. Your God may love you, but we don't recognize your God, and we're going to make life very difficult for you. So now the Israelites have an antagonist in this story. And you're like, okay, we got a plot now because we have a protagonist and we've got an antagonist. Now something can happen in the story. And what we see is motivated by a mix of racially biased fear and opportunistic profit, the Egyptians have enslaved the people of Israel. But it gets worse. It's going to get worse. Because the end of chapter 1, the third key word for verses 15 through 22 is the word slaughter. Because now the king is not just going to say, let's enslave them. Let's enrich ourselves based on their hard work. Verse 15. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Israel called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this? And let the male children live." The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." I love that, by the way. These women are like, not only is this civil disobedience, which we can talk more about next week, but this is just a slap in the face. Like, oh, why are we not there when the male babies are born? Because our women are strong, unlike your women, because our women are doing all the work in your society. So they just pop babies out. Y'all can't do that. We're doing that. We can't get there in time. Sorry. Then he goes on, verse 22, then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Now, you notice what Pharaoh is commanding and kind of why. His initial command to the midwives is basically, if you're helping in the delivery of a Hebrew baby and it's a girl, fine, let her live. But if it's a boy, kill the boy on the spot. When that doesn't work to suppress the Israelite population, he makes a more universal order. Anyone and everyone who finds a Hebrew boy, throw him in the river, because he'll drown or the crocodiles will get him. So he's trying to wipe out the people. And if you're like, well, why? Why is he doing that? Well, big picture, why? It's just he had an evil and cruel heart, but he wanted to dominate the Israelites because he felt threatened by them. Okay, so why the boys? If you don't know this, well, one, it's the boys who would grow up to be the warriors and the soldiers who would ostensibly fight against them. So like, we got to get rid of the soldiers. Secondly, the inheritance or the bloodline was always in that day, it was just viewed as like it's passed through the male. The male preserves the family name and lineage, the woman does not. So kind of the point of that is we can kill the boys, we can intermarry with the women, and by intermarriage and assimilation, there is no more Hebrew people after a generation of doing this. That's what he's thinking. Let me suggest one more thing, since these are not just the Israelites versus the Egyptians, but these are, again, paradigms of goodness versus evil. Let me suggest that another reason that Pharaoh is doing this to the men, and not that he knows Genesis 3:15, the first gospel in the Bible, but what this really is, it's an underlying demonic attack on the male offspring of the woman who is promised in Genesis 3:15. Pharaoh is a puppet of Satan, and Satan's trying to kill the line of the Redeemer by getting rid of every male. Now, I don't want you to gloss over this too quickly. You're like, I know the end of the story. Most of you probably do. But if you were an Israelite living in Egypt during this time period, during Exodus 1, you could be like, I've heard the stories from my parents, from my grandparents, from my great-grandparents. I've heard about how God worked in the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I heard about how God did this amazing, miraculous salvation of all the people through this Hebrew Joseph. I've seen how faithful we are. We continue in the ways of God, the best we know, Elohim. We're worshiping him, we're sacrificing to him, we're obeying him with our lives, and he's blessing us. But then all of a sudden, my entire life has become a life of oppression and hard labor, and now the baby boys are disappearing. And if you're living in that generation, you're just like, I don't get it. I hear these stories about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I'm looking at my circumstances, and this doesn't compute. This doesn't line up. And wouldn't you be asking, where is God? Where is this God that my parents told me about? That's great that you got to experience Genesis 1-7. I didn't. My entire life has been a life of affliction and hard work. And again, the baby boys are now dying. Why is life so hard if we are theoretically God's special people and we're obeying his cultural mandate, and yet everything is excruciatingly painful? And I want you to invite you, like, go ahead and skim Exodus 1 and ask yourself this question: where is God? Where is God in Exodus 1? You're like, well, he shows up finally in verse 17, but that's because the Hebrew midwives feared God, and they were breaking the rules of an evil empire because they valued the sanctity of life. We're not seeing God in Exodus 1 because he shows up to rescue his people. He shows up because they're saying, well, the people feared him, and they did the right thing. And I think this is why the Exodus story is immediately applicable to each one of you. Isn't it a universal question? Where is God when life hurts? Where is God when I'm trying to do the right thing and I'm just taking one punch after another after another? Where is God when I fear him and obey him and the enemy just keeps making my life more and more miserable? I'm saying, where is God? Where are you? And you can be like, well, theologically, I know God is in heaven and God is everywhere. The Bible says he's omnipresent. So, God, I know you're present here. That's not really what we're asking. We're not like, where are you? Because we're like, well, the problem is I know you're here. So the real question underneath the question is not where are you? It is, why aren't you doing anything? Right? See, if you're so real and so loving and so powerful and so good and so with me, whatever that means, why aren't you doing the thing that it's obvious you should be doing right now? They're killing our baby boys. Why don't you do something about that? Well, let me show you one more thing from Exodus 1. What happened? What's the very next thing that happens after Pharaoh enslaved the Israelites and said, you will build my warehouse cities? Verse 12. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. What's the very next thing that happens after Pharaoh ordered the massacre of every Israelite boy? What happened when two Hebrew midwives stood up to the most powerful man in the world and mocked him to his face? Our women are better than yours. Because they feared God more than they feared death. The very next thing is verse 20. God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. So here's a fourth key word, surprise. Verse 12, verses 20 and 21, surprise. Okay? It's human nature to obsess over one surprise in the story and to miss the other. We already talked about the first surprise. It is surprising to us that the Israelites were obeying God's command, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and greatly multiply upon it. But surprise, it didn't go well for them. Well, we talked about that. But what's the second surprise? The second surprise is everything Pharaoh did to enslave and to annihilate the people of Israel only led the people to grow in size and strength. Do you see that? So get this. This is important. Pharaoh was determined to destroy the identity of God's people. And he was determined to destroy the future hope of God's people. How's he doing that? Well, if I kill all your boys and assimilate all your women in a generation, you have no distinct identity. I've assimilated all of you. Who are the people of God now? They're disintegrated. They're distributed across the world. They're unrecognizable. So I will kill your identity, and I will kill your future. You are never, ever, ever, ever going back to the land that you came from. You will never be free people. I will never worry about you again because I'll enslave you and I'll kill you, and you're never going home. And the first thing I want you to see in conclusion is that this is what Satan is trying to do in every generation. And he uses the same two tools, slavery and slaughter. He enslaves and he kills because he's trying to destroy your identity and your future hope. I think Satan honestly thinks, and this is kind of like screw tape letter stuff, I think this is what he thinks. If I can beat you down long enough and make your life miserable enough, you'll start with questioning God, and then I've got you. I've got you because you'll lose hope. I got you because then you'll assimilate into the world and look like everyone else. and your faith will die, and you will die. It's this 4-punch combo. You used to do this stupid boxing video. You do jab, cross, hook, uppercut. And here's what Satan's doing. Here's his 4-punch combo. First, I'll kill your hope. Then I'll kill your distinct identity in the world. Then I can kill your faith in God. And then I can kill you. But in this case, it didn't work. The more he tried to kill the Israelites' identity and their future and their hope, what happens? I mean, God's doing jujitsu. Because jujitsu is, I'm going to use your momentum against you. All your momentum is toward enslaving and killing the people of Israel. So he isolates them. Do you see what God does? Surprise. It's surprise after surprise, because it's like this. Oh, you want to kill our baby boys when we help bring them into the world? Well, too bad. Our women are hardier than yours, and we just can't get there in time. Sorry. Oh, you want to destroy our future and hope by enslaving us? Well, too bad. God's on our side, and we're growing way faster than you can stamp us out. And by isolating us in slavery, I mean, just look at the American South, okay? The chattel slavery, it was an evil institution, make no bones about it. But does that eliminate the identity of those African Americans, or does it solidify it? Because they're now in bondage together, and like, all we got is each other. And what we believe about God, and we're going to come up with our own music, and we're going to come up with our own holidays, and we're going to come up with our own layer after we had our own food, we got all our own stuff. And that's what's happening in Egypt. They're like, okay, you can enslave us, you can try to kill our hope, but all you're doing is you're cementing our collective identity. Yes, we're oppressed right now, and we're afflicted, and we're beat down, and we're pretty hopeless, but you're not killing our identity, because we are very clear on who we are. You want to erase our names from the history? I love this part. You want to erase our names from the history books? Too bad. The whole world's going to know forever the names of 2 Hebrew doulas. Hello, like Shifra and Puah. We don't even come back to that. It's just like, guys, I want you to know about these 2 women who feared God. And the Pharaoh's like, I will make you nameless. I'm sorry, and what's your name? He's never named. We don't even know what Pharaoh he was. The most powerful man in the world, he's like, God telling the story is like, we don't know who you are. And we don't care who you are. Because you're just standing in for evil and rebellion and standing against God. And see, here's what I want you to see. Everything Pharaoh did as a pawn of Satan was real. It was painful. It was excruciating. And it wasn't final. Because God was in the surprise. God was in the surprise. So 4 questions for you in conclusion. Number 1, what has you asking, where is God? Meaning, why is this happening to me? Again, is it your financial health? Is it a struggle for employment or housing right now? Is it some addiction or another? And don't think I'm just talking about a chemical addiction, because we get all kinds of people addicted to all kinds of things. You're trying to break the bondage of an idol, and you realize, I thought it was my friend until I tried to get away from it, and now I can't. Where's God? When I'm enslaved by someone or something that I can't break free from, where's God? Why is he allowing this to happen? I want you to name that thing or things in your life that have you asking that. Again, I have things in my life that have me asking the question, why don't you care about this? Secondly, how are those circumstances threatening to kill your hope and or your identity in Christ? Because some of you be like, I'm about to give up. I understand why so many Christians deconstruct their faith, because they're looking at their circumstances and they're saying, this just doesn't jive with what I understand about God's character and God's promises. And everyone from Exodus 1:8 on could have said that. Like, Elohim, I'm deconstructing now, okay? You can show up, but I'm losing my hope. And I don't even know who I am in you anymore. How are your circumstances doing that or threatening to do that? But number 3, let's turn the corner, Because the next question is, where is God still showing up in the surprise in your life? I call it the yes, but. Yes, you were ordered to kill all the baby boys on the birth stool, but, our women are kind of awesome. We're not getting there in time. You're commanding us to throw all the babies in the Nile. Yes, but we're still multiplying faster than you can kill us off. This is still happening in my life. Yes, acknowledgement, but where is God in the surprise? And then fourthly, how might God be preparing you for what comes next? We're going to find out in the next chapter. I see your pain. I see the affliction. I hear your cry. You don't think I do, but I do. And I'm working behind the scenes in ways that are subtle to you, but are real to me, getting you ready for what's about to go down. And I believe with full confidence in the Word of God that He's writing a similar story in you, that even if you don't see it this moment, get people around you who help you see it. God is still working. God is still preparing you for what comes next. So may we go this week in the hope and the assurance of Exodus 1. The Lord preserves the identity and the future of those who fear Him. So don't throw it away because life hurts right now. Look through it. God, where are you? And that's not a demanding, accusatory, where are you? It's show me your glory as you're about to in this story.
You just listened to a recording of a sermon from Grace City Church in Denver, Colorado. We hope you can join us in person soon. Thanks for listening. The Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.